Hi, welcome to Fashion Forecasting. This is FD200, and we are going to go into Chapter 10 in your Fashion Forecasting textbook. All right, so here we are. Okay. So we're in part 3, which is forecasting in action. This is chapter 10, inspiration, theme, and mood. Objectives for this chapter are to identify different aesthetic styles based on their characteristics, differentiate between the various types of core concepts and how designers incorporate them into their collections. Also to be able to describe the issues associated with cultural appropriation and identify how fashion designers can draw inspiration from a culture without appropriating it. And lastly, to understand the mood and theme that contribute to the aesthetics of a designer's runway collection. Designer inspiration. So creativity in fashion is driven from inspiration. Inspiration is an intellectual force that results in new ideas. In fashion, just in general, we need to be constantly inspired by our surroundings, whether that be by fashion, by travel, by architecture, by color, by food. That allows us to drive new forces and create new collections or new ideas. And it's really, really important to be consistently inspired and also not to silo yourself in only being inspired by designers or past collections. It's really important to be well-rounded when it comes to inspiration. Designers may also be inspired by a muse, which is a person or a character who embodies the ideal look for that designer and provides them with a source of inspiration that guides their design process. So, back in the day, there were many designers that were inspired by Marilyn Monroe. We know that there's some inspired, Balenciaga right now is inspired by Kim Kardashian, right? So there's definitely designers that take inspiration from actual people that totally embody their collection, their aesthetic, their ideas for their brand, and they kind of provide that source of inspiration to guide them through their design process. An aesthetic is a particular taste or approach to the visual qualities of an object. So when we talk about aesthetic, that means that we're taking a certain approach visually to an object or to a project. When style, oppositely, is distinctive or characteristic manner of expression. So you can have an aesthetic going into a project, but have a different style of that aesthetic. So it's a little confusing, but essentially we need to remember that aesthetic is essentially a taste or an approach, and style is a characteristical manner of expression. So some aesthetic styles that the book goes over is modernism, rhythmic fashion change, in which a few styles dominate and emphasize on unity, harmony, and design through attention to simplicity and function. So functional clothes, simple clothes, but classic. Things that do not go out of style and that are not specifically trendy for the moment, but they always emphasize unity in design. Designers focus on sleekness, banishment of frills, functional details, performance, and technical fabrics. A great example is Donna Karan's 7 Easy Pieces collection revolutionized women's wardrobe around the globe, because with those 7 pieces, you could have fundamental wardrobe pieces that could be interchanged, and that could essentially be the building blocks of a classic wardrobe that never goes out of style. Postmodernism, so these styles have a higher level of complexity. They have exaggerated design elements and lower levels of organization. We traditionally mix symbols from different cultures and times, or on the protective function of clothing. So when we talk about postmodernism, this is when we're bringing together a combination of either culture or different time periods, and we're putting them together to make functional clothing. A great example of this is Vivienne Westwood's Nostalgia of Mud collection is the representative of postmodern aesthetic, and that is the image to the right. Avant-garde, okay, so this rejects dominant social values, popular culture, and middle-class lifestyle. It supports subversive design principles. So it's going against the grain of anything that is popular, in demand, essentially that the middle class is drawn to. It's not usually praised or accepted by people outside the fashion world. People outside of the fashion world have a very hard time digesting and understanding an avant-garde fashion sense. An example of this is a Met, the Met Gala when Pharrell's wife, or the Comme des Garçons dress here on the right, that really kind of pushed boundaries, was very unexpected. It didn't match her partner, but that was kind of going against those dominant social values. Aesthetic style, the last one is futurism. So it's associated in the mid 1960s with a group of primarily French designers inspired by the space race. So these designers were inspired by going to outer space, living there, being there. What would you wear there? It felt contemporary. These designers felt contemporary fashion were unimaginative and unimaginative. They embraced technologies, advanced fabrics, unusual materials. They focused on unsaturated primary colors and shiny and reflective surfaces. And then a great example of that to the right is Pierre Cardin's 1964 Women's Cosmocorps collection. Okay, some core concepts. Core concepts are culturally expressive ideas that are regularly revisited and reinterpreted across seasons, years, and decades. So these are things that we are constantly, just as an industry, going back to and reimagining and reproducing. Fashion forecasting requires 3 competencies: knowing how to research fashion developments, the ability to identify the visual and symbolic core concepts, and lastly, the expertise to analyze the match between fashion developments and the marketplace, and to synthesize a seasonal forecast for a client. So identifying the core concept requires active processing of the abstract feature. So as a fashion forecaster, we're constantly in search of those core concepts, the things that are carrying us through seasons. And we do that through researching fashion developments and then identifying the visual and symbolic core concepts and then analyzing those developments. So some types of core concepts are the past. Fashion designers must reinterpret styles in a way that will feel new, fresh, and modern to current customers. So a great example of that is a little black dress, right? How do we update a little black dress? We add polka dots, we add ruching, we add tiers, we add bows, we add sleeves, right? So we're constantly refreshing styles that are classics that we revisit from the past. Ethnic sources, using ethnic sources without altering or adapting the look and not attributing to looks to the native culture has been controversial. References can attempt to serve as an indication of naturalness and authenticity. Obviously, using ethnic sources is a touchy subject. There's a right and a wrong way, essentially, to do that. We do not want to appropriate cultures, but sometimes we can be inspired by texture, color, the flow of dress, the functionality of dress, right? So there's a correct way to grab inspiration from ethnic sources that, some designers do and some designers don't. Sexuality, stiletto heels, rouge, lipstick, rather than nail polish, and women smoking cigarettes all became the subculture of prostitutes and spread to other classes. Expressions of sexuality go with the attitudes of living outside accepted norms and dressing the part. Okay, so we draw a lot of inspiration and grab information for our core concepts from sexuality. Also, sports and athletics. American sportswear grew out of fashions for an active lifestyle, including playing sports and being a spectator. Today, all categories of sports are referenced in casual and streetwear collections. So a lot of our streetwear, a lot of everyday wear that we wear to the supermarket, to school, are based on either being a spectator of a sport or actually playing that sport. And then lastly, famous brands have usurped many of the looks originated by small manufacturers of outdoor gear for extreme sports. Okay, so another core concept is military. High fashion frequently reinterprets military uniforms. The standard sizing system was developed by the military, so that's a really important fun fact to understand. We use things like lapels, brass buttons. We use silhouettes that are frequently used in the military. So we're constantly drawing inspiration from there. Religion, religious iconography frequently influences secular fashion, like Jean-Paul chic rabbis, and appropriateness. Okay, some styles connect with certain places and attitudes. Different designers with the same design concept. So the zeitgeist, trends are a part of the spirit of the times. Very important. We did some work on the zeitgeist. So understanding the time, understanding what people are gravitating towards, why that's the spirit of the times. And because designers are experiencing the same cultural content typically, it's only natural that these influences will lead to some similarities in the collection. So if you ever watch a runway show, traditionally you'll notice that there's themes on the runway that are very similar from designer to designer, and that has to do with the zeitgeist, right? That everyone is living in the same time and being essentially inspired by either a cultural event, a social movement, a political movement, right? So the zeitgeist is a very, very important design concept. Archives, designers can look at their brand's archives for stimulus, and those who do not work for a brand that maintains an archive can turn to vintage apparel rental companies. So a lot of my friends that are designers, especially in the denim industry, traditionally shop vintage apparel and recreate those patterns because they're trying to add some interest to their brand or trying to recreate something of the past. That's something very, very popular. Another option is to book a private appointment at a second-hand book dealer specializing in fashion design, photographer for inspiration. Designers. So a few designers in each era, highly original talent who experiment with new design directions and are the ones who influence other designers. So you can tell in the last couple of years, I feel like Balenciaga has definitely been the designer's designer, right? The colors that they're using, the typography, the silhouettes, the extreme functionality and extreme design concepts have really infiltrated just the mass market, and a lot of designers are using the Balenciaga as inspiration. Trial balloons. So new fashions first make their appearance as trial balloons, which are tentative explorations of a new direction or a new look. When an idea debuts, the designer more fully exploits a new approach in subsequent collections. Meanwhile, others have recognized the innovations, altered it, developed variations, and amplified it, right? So we can talk about the Balenciaga huge dad shoe. It was introduced as a trial balloon. It debuted, then the designer kept going with it. It gained popularity, people altered it, recognized it, developed variations, and now they're everywhere. Knockoffs. A knockoff is a close copy of another company's original, but one that does not carry the originator's label. Knockoffs attempt to mimic aesthetics, not copy a style exactly. The problem is how to define a knockoff versus trends, looks seen everywhere, which are in top public domain. So knockoffs and trends are, hard to distinguish, right? Because there is a trend that is hitting the mass market, everyone wants a piece of, and how it's very hard not to, replicate something that another designer has done. But essentially, when you're doing a trend and you're mimicking that, you're kind of giving it your own touch. Knockoff is really trying to mimic that same exact aesthetic of the popular item. Time lags and idea change. A time lag is a period of exposure to a new fashion during which consumers become more aware, interested, and receptive to the new fashion. It's a trickle-down process, which we learned a while ago. An idea change is a set of linked events that move a phenomenon from subculture to mainstream. Okay, let's talk about cultural appropriation and controversy. An example is Native American headdresses as fashion. Okay, cultural appropriation is defined as a use of culture symbols, artifacts, genres, rituals, and technologies by members of another culture. A great example of this is the Victoria's Secret runway show, when they apologized for model Carly Kloss walking the runway in a Native American inspired headdress, fringed leather bra and panties at the 2012 fashion show, right? So this isn't grabbing inspiration from a culture. This is appropriating the culture by uses of the culture symbols and artifacts by a member of another culture. Theme and mood. Okay, a theme is a story that the collection tells. So we can talk about a collection going down the runway or collection in your retail store. What is the story that we're telling? Okay, is it a summer story? Is it an adventure, go outside story? Each season story needs to be new and different, but also has to align with the overarching story and image of the fashion brand. So when we talk about a brand like Lululemon, right? Each story, each season needs to have a new idea or new concept something that's exciting for our customers, but at the end of the day, they still have to align with the ideals of the brand Lululemon, right? So we can't go so far off of topic or theme that we wouldn't align with that brand anymore. When we are creating a theme for a brand or a collection, the research that's done is typically represented visually on a mood board, and that is a collage of images, words, phrases, colors, and photos that represent what a designer wants to convey. Okay, organizing fashion shows and collections around a central theme dates as far as back in 1910. So we've been doing this, creating mood boards since 1910, creating a visual representation of our ideas. And oftentimes our mood boards begin big and kind of overwhelming. And then we narrow it down to create a really thoughtful and intentional theme. So we start taking out the pieces that don't work and narrow that down to make a thoughtful theme. A well-chosen cohesive theme can make a collection become part of fashion history. So remembering that themes are really, really important. Anything that we do aesthetically and visually, and then a mood board is something that you will consistently do probably throughout the rest of your career if you stay in fashion. All right, that's all for chapter 10. Make sure that you read chapter 10. It's really, really important that you watch the videos and then read the chapters after. Thank you. Have a great week.